let's talk about tyrants. Well, not only are they mythological figures, but they exist and they tend to be deified. I mean, Stalin was, for all intents and purposes, God the Father in Soviet Russia, although he was pretty much only the worst elements of Old Testament God, who was, constantly smiting people and wiping out populations and doing all sorts of things that seemed to be quite nasty. But nonetheless, people worshipped him in many ways, and he's a representation of just exactly what goes wrong when things really go wrong, when people stop paying attention and when they all lie. Because one of the things that characterized the communist state was that no one ever got to say anything they actually believed, ever. And that was partly because 1 out of 3 people was an informer, which meant if you had a family of 6 people, 2 of them were informing on the government about you, and that included your own children. And if you were an informer, you were often amply rewarded by the state, so that if you lived in an overcrowded apartment building with 3 families in the same flat and you informed on, the woman down the hall that you didn't like, she got shipped off to the old concentration camp and you got her apartment. And so that was a lovely society, and it only killed about 30 million people between 1919 and 1959. So that's what happens when the archetypal structure gets tilted badly, when people forget that they have a responsibility to fulfill as citizens, as awake citizens who are capable of stating the truth, and the archetype shifts, so there's nothing left of the great father except the tyrant, and let's not have that happen. I mean, the one on the right is really interesting because consciously or unconsciously, there's Stalin surrounded by what is, for all intents and purposes, fire. He looks like Maleficent in Sleeping Beauty when she shows up at Aurora's christening. She puts her arms up in the air and green fire surrounds her. It's like he's surrounded by fire, and there's Lenin above him who's like king of the fiery realm, and that's for sure. So I mean, all the terrors that happened in the Soviet Union didn't start under Stalin, they started under Lenin, and Stalin was definitely Lenin's legitimate son, let's put it that way. So, this is another example of the tyrannical element of the Great Father and the sorts of things that can happen. I mean, I kind of got an evil kick out of this ad that was quite old. It's kitschy in some sense, and it shows. I don't think that's something you'd ever see in a magazine today. 10 unusual stamps showing evil dictator. Well, fair enough. I mean, that's what he was, and that's the consequence, and that's just a tiny bit of the consequence, because the Nazis wiped out a very large number of people, often using compassion as a justification. So when they went after the mentally ill and the terminally ill, and those whose intelligence was compromised for biological reasons, and those who were too old, they basically justified it by saying that the enforced euthanasia was merciful, and that you were actually being a good person by complying with the requirements. And so, something to think about. More mythological representations, I like these quite a bit. So there's Hitler as, knight of the faith, essentially, with, I suppose that's a recreation of the Christian Holy Spirit dove, except it's an eagle, which is a bird of prey, and a what do you call those things? A scavenger, right? So that's kind of interesting. But that's Hitler as knight of the blood, roughly speaking. And this is an Allied war poster, essentially, that assimilates the Nazis to poisonous snakes. And we don't like poisonous snakes very much, and it's probably because they've been preying on us for approximately 20 million years, because snakes and primates, humans in particular, co-evolve. Depressed people are sad and frustrated and disappointed. They tend to feel all negative emotions simultaneously in a manner that's paralyzing. You take the problem, I'm suffering, and then you think, well, why are you suffering?
And then you can practice encountering the obstacles that are stopping you, and it'll make you braver, and it'll help you deal with your problems.
And so the snake is a representation of that which lies outside the comfortable domain, and that can be, you know, a snake, obviously, or it can be an abstract snake, and the abstract snake is your enemy, or an even more abstract snake is the evil in your own heart. And this is going to be a bit of a leap for you, but there's this ancient idea that developed in the West over thousands of years, far predating Christianity, that, at least its origins, that the snake in the Garden of Eden was also Satan, which is like a, what the hell, it's a very strange idea. But the reason for that, as far as I can tell, is that, you know, we have this circuitry that detects predators, and a predator, a good representation of a predator is a snake or a monster that incorporates snake-like features, like a dragon or something like that, or a dinosaur with lots of teeth, or a shark that lives under the water and will pull you down, you know, because I suspect a lot of our ancestors met a nasty death at the hands of Nile crocodiles while they were in the African veldt going down to get some nice water. So, you know, that's the thing that jumps up and pulls you under, and, you know, and that happens in your own life because things jump up and pull you under. You know, and you use the same circuitry. We use the same circuitry to process unknown things that upset us, as we once used to detect predators who were likely to invade our space. And so, and human beings are capable of abstraction, and so, you know, you could think about the real predator that might invade your space, and maybe that's a snake or a wolf or some kind of monster. You know, and that's pretty concrete and biological. Chimps have that, you know, chimps don't like snakes, and so if a chimp comes across a snake in the wild, then like a big, let's say, I don't know what live with chimps, I don't know if they're pythons, but they have constrictors there anyways. So, you know, maybe there's like a 20-foot constrictor, and the chimp like stays a good distance away from it, but it won't leave, and then it has this particular cry that it utters that's called a snake rah, W-R-A-A, and so it makes this noise, which means something like, holy shit, that's a big snake. And I actually mean that because the circuits that primates use to utter distress calls are the same circuits that we use to curse. Just so you know, that's why people with Tourette syndrome swear, because like, what's up with that? How can you have a neurological condition that makes you swear? Well, it turns out that guttural affect-laden curses are mediated by a different speech circuit, and that's the speech circuit we share with the predator alarms of other primates. So that's pretty cool. So anyways, the chimp stands there and makes this snake noise, and then a bunch of other chimps come running, and you know, some of them stay a fair ways from the snake, and some of them get pretty close, but they'll stand there and watch that snake for like 24 hours. You know, so they're fascinated by it. And, you know, if you've handled snakes, you can understand that fascination because they're fascinating, you know, and they're numinous, I would say. That's the right way of putting it. And numinous is a word that means intrinsically meaningful, like a fire, you know. You can't look away from fire. You know, if you're sitting in front of a fireplace, it's like you're staring at it. And that's because you're all descended from the first mad chimpanzee who had some weird genetic mutation that made it impossible for him to stay away from fire. It was like the first chimp arsonist, you know, and he figured it out, and well, hey, now he was a chimp with a stick with fire on it. Like, that's a mega chimp, man. And so, you know, we have that mutation in spades, and no wonder. So anyways, so they make this, you know, they have this reaction to snakes, and chimps that have never seen a snake, if they're in a cage and you throw a rubber snake in there, it's like bang, they hit the roof, but then they look at the snake, you know. So it's like, it's terrifying and fascinating at the same time. And you should look at the snake because you want to know what it does, but you should stay away from it because it's a snake. So you're kind of screwed in terms of your motivations, right? One is get the hell away, and the other is, well, don't let that thing do anything that you're not watching. And so that's really the reaction we have to the unknown.